Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for each of you taking time out of your busy schedules to join the commission for this important meeting today. I know we all wish we could be doing this in person. Sadly, the situation doesn't allow that. So I thank the commission and its staff for helping us all meet virtually. I can't go around and acknowledge all the important folks or the folks who share different roles. I certainly see two of my colleagues, of course, who participate in the program, Justice Morgan and Justice Earls. Thank y'all for all your hard work with this commission. And thank you, everybody. Each of us has an important role to do as we seek to fulfill our constitutional mandate that the courts are to be open and that justice is to be administered without favor, denial, or delay. We're in the process of trying to collect information about the pro bono hours this year, and I want to applaud our colleagues across the state for their efforts in trying to meet the legal needs. I was talking with a lawyer just a couple of days ago, and he was telling me about his pro bono activities. I said, have you reported any of this? And he's like, oh no, but I guess I need to. And I was like, yeah, you need to. But of what we have captured, it's fascinating. We actually have captured more than 14,000 hours this year as opposed to last year. And particularly during the pandemic and all the challenges that we faced during this time, I just am so grateful. We also have a significant increase in the number of folks that are eligible for the Honor Society and the Honor Society cohort. So thank you to all the folks who appreciate that we can't keep our, an open court does no good if folks don't have access to it. And certainly it's our goal to make our constitutional mandates a reality. Recently, the Conference of Chief Justices passed a resolution noting the need for helping folks access the court. In that, the resolution talks about that folks need to develop, continue, and expand self-help services, utilize technological innovations in order to facilitate access to information in the courts so that all court users receive the help they need and are treated with dignity. As you well know, eCourts is coming to a county near you. We're going to start in June, July with Wade County, Johnston, Harnett, and Lee. Those are our pilot districts. We're hoping that that will make access to the courts easier. We also have developed Guide and File, which is a program that allows individuals to have forms that they can go, and the program helps them work their way through that. I'm delighted to report to you that we had more than 10,000 hits on that website in the month of March. And we actually had more than 700 people complete a survey. 80% are saying that it's easy or very easy to use, so that's a good thing. The Guide and File are for both lawyers and non-lawyers to have forms that they can easily fill out and submit. And of course, once we get to eCourts, they're going to be able to do this through the eCourt system. So, we are trying to use technology to help us with court access, but certainly we're going to learn a lot more today about what the civil needs of North Carolinians would be. And with that being said, I'll turn this over to my colleague, Justice Anita Earls, who is the chair of the Legal Needs Assessment Steering Committee.
Thank you so much, Chief Justice Newby. And I want to add my gratitude to all of you for being here with us this afternoon. You are here because of your leadership role within the legal community in the state. And I hope that by learning what we have documented about legal needs, you can then share this information with your networks and use it to further the goals of the Equal Access to Justice Commission. So thank you for being here. I'm going to take just a minute to give you an overview of the assessment process, but really kind of a historical overview, how we got to doing this in the first place. What was then the North Carolina Legal Services Planning Council did a study of the legal needs of those living in poverty in North Carolina in 2002, that was issued in 2003. But then when the Equal Access to Justice Commission was created by an order of the Supreme Court signed by then Chief Justice I. Beverly Lake in 2005, the very first paragraph that describes what the commission is supposed to do said, identify and assess current and future needs of low-income North Carolinians for access to justice in civil matters by conducting a study to determine the full range and volume of such unmet legal needs. And the paragraph goes on for great detail about what this study should do. And it has always been, therefore, kind of built into the DNA of the commission that we should be doing some kind of study of the legal needs. And I think that there's a multitude of reasons that this became the time that it got done. So I think one thing I want to point out that was really crucial was the fact that we worked to obtain consensus amongst the legal services providers, the Alliance, the legal services providers in the state, that this was a good time to do this kind of study. And I think that was crucial because doing this study made more work for them, right? They had to be involved, they had to give us data, and it was important that they believe it was valuable. But I think it was also important and really significant to recognize that they have been keeping data. All of the programs are data driven. They keep statistics that inform their priority settings, how they set their priorities. And as someone who used to run a nonprofit, I was always in awe of all of the legal services providers' abilities to document what they do, not only in terms of numbers of clients served and cases brought, but also in terms of the financial impact and the broader community impact that their work was having for North Carolina. So I hope it's important for everyone to recognize that we did this study not because there wasn't data already or that programs weren't keeping this data, but that there were some goals to be met by by one statewide study, all the groups working together. And we looked at some of the other legal needs studies done in other states and tried to draw, and it's really fascinating to see the evolution of some of the earlier studies in the 1980s, 1990s, and how over time, data collection and methodologies and what they were trying to measure, how they were measuring it evolved. But that set the stage. It's also really vital that we obtained funding from North Carolina IOLTA and the North Carolina Bar Foundation to support this. And we are enormously grateful to them for seeing the value in doing this work and supporting this study. And then we were able to assemble an incredible advisory committee. And I want you all to know who those folks are who informed this work. So in alphabetical order, Shelby Benton from the Benton Law Firm in Goldsboro, our own District Court Judge Ashley Parker Dunstan, Rick Glazier from the Justice Center, George Housen from Legal Aid of North Carolina, Jason Hensley from the Bar Association, and Darren Jordan from the State Bar were liaison to the committee, Robin Merrill from Pisgah Legal Services, Tiandra Miller from the Domestic Violence Prevention Initiative, Suzanne Reynolds from Wake Forest University Law School, Darren Rice from Mecklenburg County Court in Charlotte, Sorian Schmidt from the Zeesmith Reynolds Foundation, Ken Shore from the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, and Audrey Snyder from Ward Black Law in Greensboro. A geographically diverse group of stakeholders worked really hard. We actually had in-person meetings back when those were possible, setting the goals for this study and then directing it as it went along. But I want to leave you with this thought that a lot of what you're about to hear will not be surprising. Some of it may be, but I think it's incumbent on us, particularly when we think about the huge gap that exists between the legal needs of the people of the state and the ability to provide them with the legal advice and legal representation that they so badly need to navigate the legal issues that arise in their lives. You know, access to justice is one measure internationally that is used to determine the extent to which the rule of law exists in any particular society. And I think it raises for us some fundamental questions about what does it mean about our civil justice system that so many people, and indeed the vast majority of people in poverty and of limited means, don't have the legal advice that they need, often when they are facing overlapping legal issues, you know, housing and employment and healthcare issues. So I ask you to think fundamentally, not only in the short term, what can we do about this, but how we address the data that we're about to hear. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Stephen Sills. We set out what we want to do and looked for people who could do it and found the absolute perfect person to lead up this study. Dr. Sills is with the Center for Housing and Community Studies at UNC Greensboro and has just been incredible to work with as he and his team did phenomenal work for us. So with that, Dr. Sills, I'm going to let you tell folks what you learned.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Justice Earls and the Commission. I'm going to share my screen here and enlarge it so that everybody can see. And I'd like to start off by thanking Mr. Bruce Rich, who's on this call. He started this project as a graduate student in the MPA program at UNCG. He has a background in law, and without him, this project would have been far less stellar. He conducted most of the qualitative research that you'll see embedded in this study, did much of the writing of those analyses of interviews and focus groups. And many of you may have met him in this process as he interviewed and conducted focus groups across the state. Dr. Haiyang Su was our quantitative researcher. He had to wrangle 1.7 million records from 5 years of the AOC in addition to the surveys that we collected from stakeholders and from clients. Meredith DiMattina, who's a master's in GIS and conducted all of our geographic information and geospatial mapping, has to be commended as well for the story map that you will see on the website that's the companion to this research. There were ambitious goals. In social sciences, we tend to create very small projects with 1 or 2 research questions. In this project, there were 8 goals. Each, if you will read, are multi-part: to identify legal needs of low-income communities, document current resources and services available to meet those needs. 3 elements there in that first goal alone. Understand the specifics regarding the gaps in availability of services and what resources are needed to address unmet legal needs. These are complex goals of the study. The third goal, identify and quantify, where possible, the accomplishments of legal services service providers since 2000. So looking back over the past 20 years at the successes in the process. The fourth goal, to produce a written report that can educate stakeholders about the justice gaps in North Carolina. And that report is nearly 380 pages long, rather dense and cumbersome. Bits of information for everyone contained there. We'll be boiling that down to the main salient points during this talk. The fifth goal of the study was to provide data and analysis that will be useful for legal aid providers and stakeholder organizations seeking to expand access to legal services. The sixth goal, to gain a more detailed understanding of how race, gender, age, disability, and other factors affect the depth and type of civil legal problems people experience. The seventh was to identify geographic, racial, gender, and other demographics, who gets help and who does not. And finally, the eighth goal was, where possible, assess whether those who do get legal aid are able to achieve long-term solutions. So you can see from just these 8 questions that we had quite a task ahead of us. A little bit about the salient contextual factors that shape these issues. We began our project by providing a demographic profile, not only of the entire state, but for each of the individual 100 counties in the state. If you visit the website, there's a tab where you can look at each individual profile, county by county, salient demographics. I'm going to point out just 2 key demographics. We looked at about 25 variables in all, but this first graphic here tells you one of the most important stories about North Carolina's socioeconomic status: growth. Our state is growing at about twice the national average. We see over the course of ACS studies, 2005 to 2009, 2010 to 2014, and the most recent 2015 to 2019, with the census there in the middle at 2010, that our growth rate has been phenomenal. It is in rural areas, in urban areas across the state, from Asheville to Wilmington, we see that this growth is driving many of the needs of the population. As one legal service attorney said, in the last 20 years, our capacity has increased, but the population has increased faster. We can't keep up with the need because of this growing population. The other very salient factor from population dynamics is poverty. A third of households in the state live at 60% or less of the median income, and that is disproportionately impacting African American households and people of color, who are twice as likely to live in poverty. And as you can see from this map, the darker red areas are concentrated in rural areas to the east and southeast, and to a lesser degree in northern Appalachia and outside of the Charlotte area. We see that poverty is a rural issue as well as an issue for people of color. Some of the methods and data that we have used in this research: 8 civil legal service providers or organizations provided case summary data for 2015, the numeric data that they had been tracking over the course of the year of the types of cases they were seeing, the demographics of the people that they were serving, the impact that they were making within communities. 28 key informant interviews were conducted, 21 law firms and legal service providers were represented, 48 organizations participated in some way in our interviews and focus groups. There were 57 participants across the state in 7 focus groups. 702 community surveys were completed by clients. 1,176 legal stakeholder and providers were surveyed. 1.7 million administrative records from 2015 to 2019 were analyzed at an individual level and mapped for 26 civil case types. And we used the most current socio-demographic and economic data from the American Community Survey of the Census Bureau, Simmons Analytics, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and a number of other statistical data sets. These interviews, focus groups, and surveys were with folks from women's shelters, rescue missions, economic development agencies, councils of government, churches, housing counselors, CDCs, lawyers, magistrates, clerks, nonprofit service agencies, a diverse group of stakeholders. We also talked to experts in housing, immigration, domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, foreclosure prevention, agriculture, disabilities rights, elder law, family law, children's rights, and their clients. There were more than 50 themes that emerged from the qualitative data. You can see a list here of some of the key themes. I will focus on just a few of those themes: housing and family law, underserved populations, barriers to service, and then the impact of COVID-19 in highlighting the underlying needs. And I'll be weaving in survey data, secondary source data, as well as the focus group and interview data in this presentation. First, to begin with, in our survey of lawyers and stakeholders across the state, we had two items that emerged clearly as the top areas of client need: housing legal services and family legal services, the two bars at the top. The scale was from 1 to 4, with 4 being greatest need, and we see that the average in these two categories is around 3.5. These two themes emerged in interview, in focus group, in client surveys, in all data sets. Here we are with a view from the survey of clients, services that they had used in the last 5 years. And we see again, housing legal services at 46% and family legal services at 21%. So clearly both recognized from the point of view of the service providers and from their clients. In the case data, this came out as well. We annualized the 1.7 million administrative records to take care of any kind of fluctuation from year to year. There were approximately 366,000 annual cases in these 26 categories, and 46% of those cases were for summary ejectments. Clearly, housing is an enormous need here. Divorce was the second highest category at 10%. Collections on accounts, domestic violence, foreclosures, custody, and other cases rounding out. In mapping this information, we look not only at the raw numbers that were filed. We can see from this map that clearly the urban areas had the highest numbers of cases of summary ejectment. But we also divided by the population size to see that there are needs in rural areas for eviction that are equal to, and in some cases higher than, cases in the urban areas. There are many providers in the urban areas, but in Nash and Edgecombe County and south in Cumberland County, we see need is quite high relative to the population size for summary ejectments. We looked at self-reports from 8 service agencies. They reported that they had prevented 1,897 evictions and 284 foreclosures in 2019, but that's just 1% of all of the volume of cases filed annually. 170,000 eviction cases or summary ejectment cases filed and 23,778 foreclosures filed. These quotes show how providers recognize that they're unable to keep up with the demand for their services. Family was the second highest category of need, and it was a complex set of cases: divorce, domestic violence, custody issues, no contact orders, restraining orders, temporary custody orders were all interrelated. As one respondent said, we can get them a 50B order, but we can't always take care of the full array of family law issues that they need assistance with. We had over 60,000 domestic violence clients recorded in 2019. And we can see from this map, when we look at the by population rate, that it is highest in rural areas and skews towards the western portion of the state. The legal providers, the 8 agencies that reported to us, had assisted 2,910 domestic violence protection orders. there was strong evidence of improvement in domestic violence in particular and family law. As we see here, this quote from a client who said, "They called me," which was very impressive, because when you're going through this type of stress, I feel like sometimes you're not aware of your needs. So to find that I had people out there who called me and said, "Hey, we want to talk to you," then I was like, "How did you find out?" And they were like, "The police told them that I might be in need of their services." Multiple times in our focus groups and in our interviews, we saw that this connection between courts, between frontline workers in domestic violence shelters, and the police had really systematized and routinized the delivery of service to these populations. But at the same time, that has increased the need even further. As this quote from a provider on the right says, "We had less sexual assault victims come forward back then. I don't believe we had less people being sexually assaulted, but I believe the level of service that we were able to provide was different because we had fewer clients." Another one added, "And now agencies have far more clients and the resources didn't keep up with that." So we see improvement, and we also see greater need as a result of that improvement. Just thinking in terms of poverty and underserved populations, we have nearly 1.5 million North Carolinians who are in poverty. That's about 5,000 to 1 to staff attorneys at these agencies, not including all of those who might qualify for other reasons. The number of service providers is just astonishingly inadequate, said one lawyer. The state, at the same time, in the last 20 years, has become much more diverse. 163% increase in the Asian population, 158% increase in the Hispanic population. And as a service provider, a lawyer said, the immigrant population is underserved as a result of chilling federal policies and laws. Another identified underserved population was those in middle income groups, those at 200 to 400% of the federal poverty level, who don't qualify for legal aid and may have to pay a $10,000 retainer or more to be able to get legal services. One respondent said, "We have a referral list for them. A lot of times I feel bad using it. It's like pointing to another overwhelmed nonprofit or direct service group that may not have a whole lot more bandwidth than we do." If you look at the distribution of income, about 50 to 60% of all households in North Carolina actually fall within the 200 to 400% gap in civil service provision. Other barriers to access were clearly identified, and they're structural in nature and related to poverty. Childcare to be able to make an appointment, taking time off work, making that choice between groceries and seeing a lawyer, transportation issues, especially in rural areas, language and literacy issues, both for immigrant as well as domestic populations, internet access, especially underscored during the time of COVID, and online service provision, health issues of the individual who's trying to make it to an appointment, a lack of trust in lawyers and the system, or a lack of awareness in what's available to them. We'll delve into just a few of those barriers. 91.2%, almost all clients who responded to the survey said that the perception of costs was the barrier that kept them from reaching out for legal services. A quarter of them said the lengthy process that they have to go through to apply or to receive assistance. 16% said they didn't feel that their cases would be important to a lawyer. And 13.4% said that they couldn't miss work days. This quote from one of the clients illustrates that issue. "I needed legal assistance with an issue I was facing at work. I believed that a major company in my city was treating employees unfairly with wages and creating a hostile work environment. I wasn't able to get legal assistance because I didn't think any law firm in my city would be interested, and I didn't have the money to fight the company legally." trust in lawyers was this repeated theme among clients. The court system, says one, historically has preyed upon poor people and people of color, and so there can be a large amount of distrust. We measured trust in multiple ways. This scale score across the bottom shows only 5% had very low trust, 15% low trust, 22% moderate trust, 40% high trust, and 18% very high trust. When we look at the scores as an average and compare by different groups, we see that veterans had the lowest score in trusting of the system and lawyers. Those at 80% of area median income or below had the next lowest, non-whites the next, very low income the next, and very high income had the highest trust. So we see that this is both the intersection of trust and income, trust and race, trust and class statuses. Let's talk briefly about the impact of COVID. This graph shows us the last year in unemployment statistics. We went from a very healthy 3.3 or full employment as of January, February of 2020 to just under 13%. And I'll point out that that's the state average, while in some places in the state we hit nearly 20%. We've dropped back down to right around 6%, and that is held steady in each monthly report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment was not equally spread through the state, as I mentioned. We see this unemployment from December 2020 mapped Rocky Mountain North in the northeast rural counties, Fayetteville and West in the south west of the state. As this quote indicates, people who had means in the past for legal services are now falling into that income classification and growing the population of those who need legal services and qualify for those from civil legal providers. COVID-19 has increased the legal needs for many, especially around housing and access to service. The pandemic has impacted unemployment rates and will continue to impact those, particularly in hospitality service industries and other areas that have not reached full employment again. The pandemic underscored issues in obtaining unemployment, in getting housing assistance, and it has increased domestic violence cases, as well as concerns from individuals about wills and advance directives. There is a growing, a greater fear of foreclosures and evictions as a result of being unable to cover housing-related expenses. We do not know the full picture as it will impact legal needs in the future. There is an executive summary available at nclegalneeds.org, an interactive story map, and the county by county profile reports for each county across the state. And I'll stop sharing at that point. And
Well, thank you. I know that all of you probably have questions you are trying to type into the chat. And to give you an opportunity to do that, but also to get some reaction, we're going to hear now from 3 of the members of the advisory committee with their reflections, their thoughts about Dr. Sill's work. And again, please type your questions into the chat. We will have plenty of time for discussion and questions and answers. But we're going to start with District Court Judge Ashley Parker Dunstan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Justice Earls, for the opportunity to serve on this committee. Thank you, Chief Justice, for calling this meeting, and also Justice Morgan and Jennifer, thank you so much for the invitation to say a few words. I have so many thoughts about everything that was said, and I'm going to try to be concise because I could go all afternoon and I will not. But what I can say is thank you, Dr. Seals, for all of your hard work, for you and the team. Like Justice Earl said, this has been a multiple year progress or situation that we've been dealing with and trying to get clarity on. And I just remember our very first meeting in Greensboro. I walked in the meeting and I said, these are going to be the issues. And that's exactly what this showed, because I see this from the district court bench, and I see these issues and I see it playing out day after day after day. And so I'm so glad to have this data so that I can actually quantify what I'm saying and what I'm seeing. And I look at page 5 of the assessment, and it literally says that, 1.7 million cases were filed in civil court, where 40% of those appeared in district court. And so district court judges, we are seeing the brunt of this. And the one thing that I can tell you is that we are tasked as judges to treat pro se litigants as if they know the law. And that is extremely difficult to do when these people are coming in front of you are not aware of the filing issues that they have, right? So when we talk about Dr. Steele's talking about people taking off of work that are already impoverished, unable to do so, they come into the courtroom, they miss something with filing, something very simple. Unfortunately, I have to dismiss it because that is what the statute requires me to do. But now I have to explain this to them why this is happening, when really, if they would have just had an attorney to answer a question for them that they were unable to feel like they could have afforded, or trust, right? Self-help clinics that Charlotte has would be vital across the state in order for people to have their questions answered. So that's one situation that, I'm seeing that's traumatizing. It's awful. I've served in all different types of courtrooms, including our family courtrooms and our domestic violence courtrooms and our child support courtrooms. And I can tell you that it would run a lot more efficiently if we had attorneys available and accessible to these individuals that cannot afford it. I think about domestic violence courtroom, and while we have legal aid, who is amazing, they, as you can see from this report, cannot handle every single case and cannot handle the need that's happening. And when we look at the impact of COVID, I worked in that courtroom, in domestic violence courtroom, during the entire stay-at-home order. And during that time, what I saw mostly was individuals who had felt like they had nowhere else to go would turn to that specific courtroom to try to get their other needs met. So whether it was an eviction, whether it was a custody issue, et cetera, and so forth. So people are navigating the system in different ways that are really inefficient, that are pulling back from the resources that our courts have. And finally, what I'll say is that I really think that we need to take a holistic approach to everything when we're talking about accessibility to attorneys. I don't care how many pro bono lawyers that we ask to do these things, it's not really going to be enough. We really need to put in some structure into this to make sure that there is no denial or delay of individuals that come into our courtrooms. And when we look at the holistic issues that, for example, we provide in criminal court an attorney for those individuals that can't afford one, well, that's not the only issue that they have. Right? Because if they're having a criminal issue, maybe a drug issue, or they're having, or there's some theft or something along those lines, and not to make it simplistic, but just giving an example, well, they probably also have a housing issue. They probably also are about to lose their children. They probably are also dealing with some type of domestic violence. You name it, they're probably going through a lot of different things, and they're just not sure where to turn. And so I think that this assessment has really shown that there is a deep need for attorneys on the civil side. How we're going to do that, there's a lot of different ways, but there needs to be, I think, a lot more funding provided to our providers, as well as some type of system for self-help for these individuals. And most importantly, that we have got to do our jobs in restoring the trust in these attorneys. And so that way our system can run more efficiently. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Judge Dunstan. It's so helpful to have the perspective from the bench. And I'm glad you started to talk about possible solutions, because I should have said from the outset that the report consciously, while it reports on what people who participated in focus groups and what other people who were interviewed thought might be good solutions, the report itself was intentionally a report on the research and doesn't go into the policy prescriptions, that's for all of you. So that's really what we all need to wrestle with. So our next commentator is Shelby Benton.
I'm gonna follow along Judge Dunstan's line. I'm really proud that we've been successful in producing a legal needs assessment for our state. Thank you to the Chief Justice and the organizations that assisted in funding this research. Thank you to the UNCG and the North Carolina Equal Access to Justice Commission and their teams for getting this all off the ground and moving it forward. And finally, thank you to all the citizens of North Carolina, and many of you are watching and listening to this today, for participating in the assessments and providing us with data that we could use. I've practiced family law in Goldsboro, North Carolina for 36 years. Goldsboro is a rural North Carolina county in Wayne County community. It's east of Raleigh, so east of 95. So I think we're pretty representative of what a rural community is like in North Carolina. And as a family law practitioner, I was not surprised at all with the results of this research. It wasn't surprising to see that family law matters, particularly custody issues, are by far the most often mentioned area of underserved practice, a quote from the executive summary. Legal services providers do not have the resources to assist in family law matters. They work hard to serve in the domestic violence arena and do yeoman's work, but they don't even have enough resources to do it in every county that we have. The office here got closed down and we work out of the Wilson office. And that's happened in lots of the rural communities across North Carolina because there's just simply not enough funding for the legal services providers to even handle the domestic violence. And so because of the shutdowns that have occurred in my community, my citizens who need legal aid, even in domestic violence cases, have a difficult time because they don't know where to call. They don't know what to do. And so the outreach to some of these communities is also difficult. And even if they did get to the outreach and get to Wilson to get help, it would be only for domestic violence matters. And there's not help in child custody or other domestic areas that, again, bleed into housing and bleed into unemployment and all kinds of other things, health services. And so even if they're lucky enough, they can't meet, can't serve the needs. Therefore, they're left to navigate our system on their own. And the lack of legal assistance in many family law matters lands squarely on the district court bench, as Judge Dunstan said. That's where it hits. And from an economy perspective, it's crazy because we're using all these resources that could be better used in other ways to serve other civil cases that could be resolved by having some basic legal advice provided for people in these low means populations. They spend significant court time handling the pro se matters, and in many instances, they would have been avoided with just some legal advice. Valuable resources could be used otherwise if they had been resolved with just a little bit of legal advice. I had the judge in district court. We had a meeting with our district court judges that do family court yesterday, a lunch. And we were talking with them about how we could help with their pro se cases. And they said, well, you know, if you just come over here and talk to both of them and get them to sign a memo, it'd be really great, right? Because that's what they're doing. They're, rather than sitting down and trying it, because when they try it, they don't get enough information to actually make an informed decision in a custody case. And so, but that's how our resources are being used. And it just creates an even bigger backlog and much more stress on the entire judicial system squarely in the district court arena. The private bar really has partnered with legal services providers over the years with various programs, Lawyer on the Line, volunteer lawyer programs, NC Free Legal Answers being sort of the newest on the block in that arena. And also, the private bar has helped fund with their money legal service providers through grants, through the North Carolina Bar Foundation and through IOLTA, which was already mentioned earlier today, the Interest on Lawyers Trust Account, and makes grants to service providers in this arena. But what we know from this assessment, and all of us knew before, but know and have the data to help us, is that what we're doing isn't enough. We just don't have enough. It's not enough. The big sign ought to say not enough. It's my sincere hope that everyone listening and anyone else you can talk to or get to be involved with us, take this assessment and use it in a way to raise the awareness of the civil legal needs services in North Carolina, to make the case for increased state fundings for civil legal needs. To this end, I suggest take your county little composite that we've prepared that Dr. Sills has done for us in each county. Take it to your local county commissioners. Take it to your legislators and show them the portions of the assessment and how it fits into your community, because ultimately that's what's most important, and that's where action will come. And everyone doing that will make some difference. It's nice if we would unify together, but individuals make a huge difference in moving the needle in this way. Hence the reason nothing's been asked. It's just the data. We've got to get out and work it, and then encourage innovative thinkers in the legal profession. And we don't need to limit ourselves. I always think about Chick-fil-A, right? Everybody's been thankful for the way they run their drive-through, and we want to do the pandemic shot clinics the same way, right? And so those innovative thinkers that are thinking of ways for the self-help centers or other resources, and hopefully when we get fiber around, I mean, I can't even get service going into my community where I live. So it's super difficult to have the internet, and it's hard to believe it's not everywhere, but my office computer works great. My home computer, whole nother story. And so we need to encourage the innovative thinkers, and we need to find ways to take those thoughts and move them into our correct arena. And I'll close with saying, let's not allow this assessment to just be put on a shelf. I think we've all talked about that in many ways, particularly this committee we've been on. Don't let it sit on the shelf. Let's work together and bring about some real change for North Carolina. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. That is really useful information to have. And I'm glad you mentioned the county by county assessments, because those are accessible through the website. You can click on the county. It's like 11 pages of basic data that actually can be useful for a number of ways, but including things like how many cases are filed in that county and what categories, census data. They really are a useful resource and tool. So next we're going to hear from Ken Shore from the Center for Legal Advocacy in Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chief Justice, to Justice Earls, to the Equal Access to Justice Commission for sponsoring the study, and to Dr. Sills and his team at UNCG for its excellent work. Over my career, I've seen a number of studies. This is by far the most detailed and the best. I speak as a longtime member of the civil legal services community, but what I have to say are my thoughts. And let me start by saying that the top level conclusion is that available resources are vastly inadequate to the need. And look, from inside the system, it often feels to me like we are an emergency room that is not attached to any hospital. It's just a handful of people addressing a major need, doing what we can do, but the scale of the resources is just not there. And that's with volunteer support, with creative delivery mechanisms. So that's a top level point. One point I want to make is that much of the legal assistance that low-income people need and that legal services programs provide is for disputes that are resolved in the state court system, but much of it is not. Some is in administrative hearing systems, such as appeals from decisions of public programs, such as unemployment insurance, SSI, veterans benefits, Medicaid, food stamps, workforce family assistance. Some is in federal agencies or courts, such as immigration, tax, bankruptcy, and other areas. And some is not disputes at all, such as preparing wills and advance directives, self-help support, community education, to keep people from getting into legal problems. And so the report draws broadly from many data sources and has a lot of information about the parts that aren't within the court system, but a lot of the data comes from the Administrative Office of Courts and only addresses the portions of the work, the need and the work that's in the court system. And I just want people to remember to have that distinction when you read the report. I have comments about a few categories in the report, and the first is immigration law. The Charlotte Immigration Court is a federal agency that handles all of the removal proceedings, that is, deportation proceedings for respondents in North and South Carolina. It's among the most unfavorable courts in the nation for respondents, with asylum approval rates that are far below the national average for respondents who are represented by lawyers. Our advocates and private lawyers who practice in the court for years have said that they have never seen a single unrepresented respondent ever get an asylum petition approved in the immigration court. So this issue about representation is truly core. The legal assistance available to nonprofit organizations to respondents in the immigration court is a tiny fraction of need. Because the restrictions on federally funded assistance, and there's no state or local government funding for this work. Families are torn apart. People, including many children, are sent back to lethal danger after hearings on complex legal issues that are conducted in English, mostly with Spanish-speaking respondents who have no legal representation. There's a huge need for more assistance in this court. With family law, I will only make the observation that in some contrast to some of the other areas of law, people above the income eligibility level for legal services programs often don't have representation in disputed child custody cases. This is not a problem that's limited to low-income people and can't be fixed just by putting more resources into the legal services system. There needs to be some other attention to how the child custody dispute system works in our state courts, because it covers a much larger group of people. Another observation I'll make is that low-income people and high-income people have more interaction with government regulation than people in the middle do. People in middle incomes can go year after year without really encountering much in the way of a government dispute with a government agency they have to resolve. But wealthy people have representation because they need it, because they face a lot of regulation, and low-income people have a lot of regulation. Legal services programs provide legal assistance with public benefits, eligibility, and benefits, including cash assistance programs like workforce family assistance, in-kind assistance such as food stamps, disability benefits from Social Security Administration and Veterans Administration, health care from Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and other government sources. In this report, there are separate categories for health, for government benefits, for disability, and each of them ranks like 4th, 5th, 6th from the top of the list. But in the legal services organizations, these practices are considered one of our core practice areas, as is family law and consumer law and housing law. And if you count them together, they are, it seems to be by far the biggest practice. Pay attention to how large that need is. And with respect to housing, I will say, most evictions and foreclosures are based on non-payment of a rent or a mortgage payment. And most of those are triggered by loss of income, such as loss of employment or termination of disability insurance or other benefits, or by a sudden large expense, such as medical bills. And the level of need in this area in housing, I mean, it's bad on its own because housing costs have increased much faster than income over the last several decades. But part of the problem is that the interruption of income and the sudden large expenses for things like medical care are not addressed adequately. And that if we had better systems for dealing with that, we had a decent unemployment insurance program, we had disability programs that were more stable, the access to health insurance was better through improvements in the Affordable Care Act or Medicaid expansion, that would reduce a lot of the housing legal need that we see. But I'll come back at the end to just that we're outnumbered. The people who work in legal services programs have a lot of experience and a lot of sophistication. And we are strategic about how we manage our resources. We do triage, we take advantage of pro bono resources to a very large degree. We are creative about ways in which we provide services, but we're swamped and we really need help. And I think the report shows that very graphically. So I would end by saying I invite everyone to help us bridge the justice gap with more resources of all kind, funding. We had state funding until a few years ago. It was largely eliminated. Volunteers and systemic changes, such as some of the ones I mentioned, that can help us meet the need. So thank you.
Thank you. We have one question, we have some comments, which is great, and one question in the chat, which I'm going to get to in just a minute, or has been answered actually. But I want to give Dr. Sills a chance to respond to any of the comments. And there's actually one in particular I'll draw your attention to start with, if there weren't others you want to jump in on. But the one I want to specifically direct you to is this question about the categories of need, and what Ken Shore just said about if you combine in the way that legal services providers do the healthcare, government benefits, and disability, you actually get the category that's really big. So what's your response to that, and any other comments?
Yeah. So the breakout in the stakeholders survey of each of the types of services provided, and then the sub-services within those, came to us as a comparison to actually several other states' surveys. What we were trying to do there was make an index that would be comparable to an index used in other studies, so that we can match North Carolina against other states, since it's being used in multiple areas. But I agree. Several of these categories could be combined, and analysis could be easily done to aggregate that information and see, once combined in different formulations, where do they rank in terms of highest need. Several things that we did do in the appendices, because when you hit 150 pages in the main part of the report, you have to start thinking, okay, now what do I just stick in the aft material? But several of the things that we did was to disaggregate need differently geographically, carving the state up into 6 different zones, looking at it by different perspectives, from legal stakeholders in nonprofits, from legal service providers in governmental agencies, from stakeholders who are not legal providers but other perspectives. So we put a lot of that kind of material in the aft matter to try to address many of the different ways that you can look at data, aggregated, disaggregated, geographic, and so on. I did want to address Justice Dunstan's comments and Shelby Benton's comments around family. I had the occasion yesterday to attend a court here in Greensboro, and I seldom go to the courthouse. I'm an academic. I'm at campus and I'm out in the field collecting information. First, it's a terrifying experience as a witness to a domestic violence case, subpoenaed to come and testify. It's terrifying as the witness to be there. It is not set up as a space that is friendly. The very first case that I saw was a woman who was in violation of her probation. She didn't understand it. She had had 2 strokes. She had had a violation that occurred because she hadn't filed in the right county because 4 years ago she represented herself pro se. It was painful to watch such a case as this, where no one could step in for her, but they didn't have enough information from her to understand what was going on. And she had a fear of who they said was her probation officer, whom she had never met. And she was saying, I don't know this man. That lack of trust, that fear, it was delicately handled by the judge in charge of the case and the DA's office and everyone in the court. But that kind of a case probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. There's so many layers of support that we could be giving to folks like that. I think as Mr. Shore has pointed out, the real bottom line in this report is that the need is great. The population dynamics are causing that need to grow disproportionately to the rate at which services can be provided, whether we're talking disability rights, immigration rights, domestic violence cases, or representing folks who need just someone to talk to that will hear their need. The gap there between service provision and service need is across the board.
So we had one question in the chat about whether there was a statewide directory of legal providers to connect people to, and thank you to those who responded with websites, the NCEqualJusticeAlliance.org website, as well as ncprobono.org website as resources. Again, please put your questions in the chat. I want to follow up, Dr. Sills, on the extent to which, if at all, conducting this research during the pandemic impacted the research itself or the findings. You know, what are we to make about the fact that we started off on one course and then about a third of the way through, everything changed?
Yeah, it presented issues methodologically in terms of how do you gather rich qualitative data from segments of the population that might not be able to meet you on Zoom or have access to a cell phone or internet. Those challenges were quite many. I'll again laud the efforts of Mr. Bruce Rich, who jumped through many hoops to make sure that we were representing fairly and accurately the breadth of populations across the state. We worked through many intermediaries, providers themselves, nonprofit groups, organizations that we helped us tap their constituents so that we made sure to intentionally represent as many of the categories of need as possible. Secondly, when you have a dramatic shift in economics, such as we have in the past year, it changes so many of the potential outcomes. The great intervening variable of mass unemployment, a shift in future economics, and perhaps the displacement of many from housing in the future can't be measured at this state. What we do have, though, in this report is a very solid baseline, well-established data from the 5 years prior to COVID, a clear understanding of coming into 2020, what the profile of legal need was. And this will give the commission the possibility of a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out to reflect on those same statistics, those same demographics, and follow up on key elements to see how they've been impacted and changed.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to pull in a couple of our panelists on Q&A as well, since so far not, if anyone wants to ask a question and typing it in is a challenge, I'm gonna offer, raise your hand. I don't, with Zoom, I can't scroll through a bunch of screens, but we'll try to find you and unmute you if that's the way you need to ask your questions. I do wanna make sure all of you are spending your valuable time with us. I wanna make sure if you have questions, we can address them. But I'd like to ask Ken Shore, as the director of a legal services program, can you talk about how this research and this report how it will influence your work? How will it be helpful? Can you talk a little bit about that? We have to unmute you, but we'll get there.
Some people think I work best on mute. It's helpful in a lot of ways. I mean, one thing is, it is a really helpful roadmap for us to look at our work and say, are there gaps that we're missing? Are we in the right strategic proportion for the different problems that people who need our help are experiencing? And, we have only just begun to sort of use it in that way internally. It's also very helpful to us in generating resources. We have, the agency I run, the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, has really no large, reliable, single funding source. We have an annual campaign. We raise about $500,000 a year, mostly from lawyers in the Charlotte area each year. We have some funding from the county. In United Way, we have a couple of foundations that give us general operating support, but all of that adds up to about a quarter of our budget, and most of it is grants for specific pieces of work. And to the extent we have some documentation of specific pieces of work that need more funding, this is really helpful to us. And one area is immigration. Immigration, it's not visible because the immigration court is its own animal. It's a part of the Department of Justice. It's only in Charlotte. It's not anywhere else in the state. And there aren't any institutions that have the scale to be able to fund representation in the state that are willing to do that. And so, I'm very hopeful this report will help us raise some more resources to do that piece of work. The group of nonprofits that provide immigration services in North Carolina is much smaller than in many comparable states. There are immigration court in Atlanta or in Dallas, Texas. There are a lot more resources for representation, not even comparing to Boston and San Francisco and Seattle. But there are other areas in which this is very helpful that way too.
Great, thank you. Dr. Sills, we've got a question about the extent of needs in urban and rural areas. We had the maps. It seemed that there are needs everywhere. Can you say something more specific about needs that predominated in the urban as compared to the rural areas and vice versa?
Yeah, so the biggest difference between the urban areas and the rural areas is that in the urban areas, you have more service provision though you have higher population. In the rural areas, you have far less service provision. In some areas, you have one lawyer serving 3 or 4 counties and unable to keep up with the flow of cases there. The barriers that exist in the rural areas, the structural barriers of transportation, internet connectivity, as Shelby pointed out, are really very different. They confound the issue of being able to seek services. Awareness of services, we found, was a little bit different as well in those rural areas. Knowing where to go, knowing who to seek service from. When you're lumped together with 5 or 6 counties in a region, you don't know where to go. And that was also with many of the nonprofit services that refer to legal service providers. They weren't clear on who you should be referred to. We know that there's potential for e-court or telecourt or teleservices in some of these areas if broadband, if internet accessibility is increased in those areas. I did see that there was a difference in the volume of domestic violence cases in the 2015 to 2019 data. That may shift in 2020 with COVID. We don't have enough data yet to say that urban and rural areas, we understand that there's increase in domestic violence in both areas, but has it met the same level as we saw in rural areas? Also, the population differences. Rural areas are aging populations. They're less diverse in some areas. And by less diverse, I mean in some counties, your rural population is all Black or all white, but not many ethnicities. So for example, the eastern portion, northeastern portion of the state has a higher Black population, the western portion of the state, a higher white population. And that presents different challenges as well, accessibility, income, and the types of legal needs that they're pursuing.
Thank you.
Certainly.
I see that we do have one hand raised, and I think we're going to unmute you to ask a question.
Hello, thank you for the invite. Juvencio Rocha Peralta with the Association of Mexicans in North Carolina, based here in Pitt County. Great report, thank you so much. My question, I think, is more the challenge that we're looking for the future to increase the number of attorneys, especially within the Latino community. Is any efforts has been taken in the state to increase and close the pipeline for future attorneys, especially within the Latino community?
I see that Shelby Benton is raising her hand to answer. Thank you.
I would say that the North Carolina Bar Association has various pipeline things that are being done in high schools and middle schools to increase diversity in the legal profession, including Latino, as well as Black and Asian. And so I do know that we have an outreach. It's run some by our Young Lawyer Division, as well as by our Minorities in the Profession Committee of the Bar Association. So I do know there is some outreach, and I'm happy if you'll put your email in my box to connect you with those resources at the Bar Association, if that would be helpful to you. And you might even have ideas for us, which would be wonderful.
I'd be happy to put my information there. We do have an internship program in our organization since 2004, and we get a lot of students from different universities that attend. That's what we're trying to foster is, future professionals in different fields.
Thank
you. I also wanted to give Dr. Sills a chance to answer that question. If there was anything you learned from focus groups or other interviews of stakeholders that would help us know about them.
I did not, but I'm going to ask Bruce if that came up in any of the focus groups that I didn't review.
No, this didn't come up. It's a question that I'd be really interested in pursuing further. I wish we had talked about it a little more.
We have one, Judge Dyson, were you going to address this question?
Well, I did want to say that I think it goes back to the trust issue, and diversity is so important throughout our court system. And so when we talk about individuals wanting to trust the attorneys that they're, asking, that are representing them, that's where that diversity piece is really key. So if we want to reach out to these communities, then we do need to foster, I think, those relationships and get those individuals into law schools and practicing in these communities. So that way there's more of that trust and understanding of what's happening. I know on the bench, that was something that was important for me, being a Black female, understanding the things that I've been through growing up in Catawba County in a rural area, and those experiences that I had, ensuring that, I did not continue those experiences on the bench, as racism or sexism or anything along those lines. So I think that, it's definitely something that's important, something that should be talked about and discussed, and is part of this legal needs assessment. We talk about the needs of the individuals and that trust. I think that this is something that definitely needs to be at the forefront of our minds.
Thank you for that. Good point. We have one last question that I'll ask, and this is for Dr. Sills or Bruce Rich or whoever might be able to address it. And that is, in your work, in the focus groups and the interviews, was there qualitative data of political barriers from the public and how politics affect legal needs? Good question.
Yes, and again, I'll let Bruce kind of take a stab at this. I believe policy came up in a variety of ways, both in recommendations from the interviewees, as well as how it plays a part in creating barriers to service. And Bruce, after you're done, I'll piggyback on the back of that. We need to, yeah.
That's right. We did not set out in our interviews and focus groups to ask about people's attitudes, insights, opinions about the political background of the issues we were discussing. We were interested in knowing about the experience of people who were engaged in the delivery of legal services and people who were seeking legal services and the gaps between the needs and the services available. But Dr. Sills is right. Some of our respondents volunteered very interesting information and opinions about the political background, because it's inevitable when talking about what are the shortfalls in available services, and what are the reasons why we have fallen short in delivering the services that we need. Of course, things that are, quote, political are going to come into the picture. And people talked about decisions made at federal and state level in legislatures, and many of our respondents volunteered ideas about the underlying causes of the poverty that result in people needing legal services. There's a really interesting set of issues that got addressed about if systemic political change were to be made addressing the problems of employment and poverty and education and racism, would we need some of the legal services that we that are in so short supply? Would we even need them? And in many cases, probably the answer is no. We wouldn't need as many housing lawyers to defend evictions if people were stable in their homes. So it's a kind of a background theme in the report, I think, even though we didn't specifically ask what are your political opinions about the context for delivery of legal services.
In follow-up, so it wasn't part of the scope of this study, but we're beginning a project related to county by county policies related to migration, the local policies of sheriffs, the local policies of courts, the local policies of practice in each county on a scale of pro to anti-immigrant, and relating that in this case not to civil legal needs but to health outcomes. It's part of a NIH study that we're looking at. That kind of work is fairly difficult. Policy at a granular level and how it impacts outcomes, but is something that could be done around any of the issues from domestic violence to housing to access to disability rights and so on.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sills. I'm going to turn it back over to Chief Justice Newby, but I'm enormously grateful to you, to all our commentators, and to the entire advisory committee. So, Chief Justice.
I think that worked, Chief Justice Newby.
I'm sorry?
I think we can hear you now.
Well, thanks to everyone. And I believe that Justice Morgan will bring our program to a close. Justice Morgan.
Chief Justice Newby, thank you. To you, Chief Justice Newby, Justice Irvin, Justice Earls, Justice Barringer, judges of the Court of Appeals and other fellow members of the judiciary, Executive Director Lechner, members of the bar, and stakeholders all. We've heard much today about the many unmet civil legal needs in North Carolina. We also know that there will be more emerging needs in the wake of the pandemic. Thanks to the dedicated members of the Legal Needs Assessment Steering Committee, chaired by my esteemed colleague, Justice Earls, the staff of our state's legal aid providers, the staff of the Equal Access to Justice Commission and the Equal Justice Alliance, the incredible University of North Carolina at Greensboro research team led by the amazing Dr. Sills, and the many other justice system stakeholders who contributed to this important work. Appreciation is also extended to North Carolina IOLTA and the North Carolina Bar Foundation, which funded this study. This collaboration of individuals and entities being committed as they are to the realization of equal justice for everyone represents the greatest combination of brilliant minds and resourceful guidance that you could have in such an endeavor as this. Having heard all this, what can we in our different roles across North Carolina do with this research, which provides the data to confirm what many of us already knew or at least surmised to help bridge the identified gaps in justice in our system? There are 4 tracks of involvement that have been identified. First of all, volunteer. Attorneys can help bridge the gap between those with low and modest incomes in the court system by volunteering to help clients. More information about such opportunities can be found at the website ncprobono.org. Secondly, donate. You can support your community's legal aid providers by donating funds to support their work. More information about civil legal aid organizations is available at the website ncequaljusticealliance.org. Third, spread the word. Tell others how civil legal aid is vital for North Carolina citizens and how it can solve problems early, make communities more resilient, and strengthen the economy. And fourth, and certainly not least, collaborate. We who are involved with the Equal Access to Justice Commission invite you to work with us to develop other ways that have not yet even been identified to meet civil legal needs in North Carolina. In the coming months, the Commission will be reviewing options and developing initiatives. You can find out more about the Equal Access to Justice Commission and its work at the website ncequalaccesstojustice.org. We hope that you will consider joining us in exploring opportunities in North Carolina. Please reach out to the Commission's Executive Director, Jennifer Lechner, to share your ideas. Finally, please remember that this session has been recorded and will soon be available on our website, nclegalneeds.org. If you want to revisit or relive any of this, play it at your leisure and also take it all in because there's much to be considered. We humbly ask and urge you to share this information with your networks. After all, this is our justice system. At this time, Chief Justice Newby, as I thank you and Jennifer Lechner and Justice Earls and everyone who's allowed me to be a part of this, I give it back to you, Mr. Chief Justice, at this time.
So well said, Justice Morgan. Thank you for your participation. It's my understanding that you were one of the original members of this commission. And through the years, we appreciate your dedication. Justice Earls, thank you for your leadership. And I join with my colleagues in thanking the researchers at UNCG. And Justice Morgan, you said it all, my friend. I'm not sure I can add anything to what you've said. Certainly, leaving our profession, leaving access to justice better than it is now is something that I know we all will strive for. So thank you. Thank you to Jennifer and her strong team with the Equal Access to Justice Commission and for their strong work. Folks, we need your ideas. We need your input on how, in fact, we can render justice without favor, denial, or delay. So thanks, everyone, for your time this afternoon. I hope everyone has a great weekend.